Alright, I'm going to record each of these facial features as a different video and then post them to Moodle. So the eye will be a different video from the nose and so on. So that you don't have to watch through a big long video to get what you need. You can just go to the video of the facial feature that you might be struggling on. Capiche? Alright, I heard a little bit. Okay. So when looking at this eye, I'm going to try to zoom in some. When looking at this eye, I like to look at the corners first, the corners of the eye, where those are at. And before, if you've done this, you probably did the simplified version of an eye, where there was just like a straight line and then you made it like a football around it. This is different from that. So I'm going to mark the corners of the eye on the sides of this box. Just the eye. I'm not looking at the crease of the eyelid. Just the eye. And I'm going to make a straight line connecting those dots. Go ahead and do this. So you'll have like a line that is the width of the eyeball. Straight line. Pretty much straight. Go ahead and do that. I'm going to make that same line on the eyeball so you can see what I'll be talking about. Just put your pencil down when you are done drawing that line so I can see who is finished. Alright, still waiting on a few people. Alright, so now if you look at that line, is half of the eyeball on one side of it and half on the other side? No. Where is there more eyeball, on the top or bottom? Yeah, the top of it. So when you draw it, there should be more eyeball at the top of this line. I'm going to look at about how high it is before the eyelid comes into place. And just kind of eyeball the measurement. It looks like it's definitely smaller than an inch. But it might be a little bigger than a centimeter. I'm going to try to make a point somewhere in that area so I know how high I will be making my curve. And then next thing I'm going to do, after I've made that little dot above that line, I'm going to look at this angle that this line for the eye will start from this straight line. Looking at that angle. It's not 90 degrees. It's definitely smaller than 90 degrees. It's not a right angle. So it's going to be something like that. And then I look at the angle over here. It's really similar. I'll start to draw that. And then it just curves up to that point. Go ahead and do this step. Doesn't have to be perfect. Every eyeball is pretty much different. So as long as it, in the end, looks like an eyeball, you'll be fine. The next thing you're going to be doing is looking at the bottom part of this eye. And it is just a sliver. If you're not looking at the eyelid, but just where the white of the eye like ends, where that eyelid is coming over the eye, if you just look at that curve, it is just a sliver. And it actually meets up with that straight line before the corner of the eye. So it meets like a half a centimeter before that. And it is a very, very skinny angle. So I'm going to mimic that over here. and then have it go up to that line early. Go ahead and do those two parts, and when you're finished with that, just put your pencil down so I can see where people are at. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is start drawing the inside parts of the eye, and then we will do the eyelids and the eyelashes, and I'll even show you guys an eyebrow. There were pencils in the way in this picture of the eyebrow, but I'll show you a good eyebrow. Okay, so now I'm seeing this circle, this big circle, the outer part of the iris, the colored part of the eye, and it dips down below that line and hits that curve that you just made. So I'm going to start with this bottom portion of it, and then it goes, if you imagine this as a full circle, part of that iris is going behind the eyelid. So I'm starting to draw this just so you can see it, but there's a skinny sliver right here where there would be iris behind it. So do not, let me show you what not to do. So if this was your eyeball shape, do not make a complete circle inside of this. The top part of the circle is cut off. So let me draw the bottom portion that dips down. And then when it comes up, the top of that circle would normally be somewhere around here. So I'm going to just go ahead and draw a circle that goes up to there and erase my extra so that I know I've made a good enough circle. You might want to do this lightly because usually people do not draw a perfect circle on their first try. I understand that. You guys are not robots. It's okay to erase. And then I'll erase that top part of that circle. I'll leave that for you right now so you can get it. And then after you draw that big circle, you'll be erasing that top part of that circle. And then just put your pencil down when you are done with that. The next part is the pupil. This is not a tiny dot. It is a tiny circle, but it's not just a dot. If you make it just a dot, it's going to look like that person has some issues. They've seen some horrible things in their life, or they're shocked. It does not look correct. But if you make it look too big, that's what they call an eye that is dilated too much. It looks like they just had eye surgery or they're on drugs or something. So you want it to look like a donut hole. There's like a Goldilocks zone of being small enough and big enough, not being too small or too big, and that's pretty much like a donut hole. So imagining that the rest of your circle, the top part of your circle is up here, imagining that's still up there. Your donut hole is going to be centered, is going to be centered with that. So it's going to look a little bit high because of where the eyelid is going to be covering part of the eye. But that is just fine. Trying to make sure that there's like an equal distance on the left side, on the right side, from where the top of this iris would be and where the bottom part is. Take your time getting a nice donut hole. If this pupil is ever being partly covered up by the eyelid, it will not look right. It could look like maybe a lazy eye, or a person that's just having some medical issues, maybe like a stroke or something. So there could be pictures where you would want the pupil being covered up by the eyelid, but usually the pupil is not getting covered up by the eyelid. When you're done drawing that pupil, take your 9XXB. Where did I put my 9XXB? Grab another one. And color in that pupil. If your iris, the big part of the donut, if that looks like a circle enough to you, then you can darken up just the edge, just the outline of that circle, because you can see in the picture that the outline of it is darkened. I'm going to come around and check on how everybody's doing. Alright, this next part, I want you to locate the shiny spot on the eye. There's a shiny spot on the left part of the iris. That shiny spot is not random, just like when you guys drew the metallic objects in here. It's a reflection of something. This one looks like a rectangle shape, and perhaps that is like one of these rectangle lights in here that it's reflecting. But it should be that same shape. Do not make a dark outline for this highlight. I'm going to make a really light outline. You might not be able to see it on the camera, but I'm going to make a really light one. Which pencil should I use? The 4H. Oh, let me wake up my computer. Yeah, use the 4H. And make a rectangle really lightly where that highlight should be. Then for the rest of that iris, the donut, I want you to shade it in with gray. Do not shade inside of that little rectangle. After you've shaded that in with gray, I want you to look at all the different little black shapes and dark gray shapes and try to mimic them closely, but I'm not going to make sure, like when I grade this, I'm not going to make sure that you got it exactly correct. It's okay. But try to mimic like the direction that they're going. It seems like they're all pointing toward the center. And do that. You can do that with your HB to begin with until you feel confident, and then darken up the really black areas with the 9XXB. And then I want you also to pay attention. There's a shadow from the eyelid on the iris. On this top part of the iris, it's darker. So on mine, right underneath this line for the eyelid, I should be making it dark here. I'll be doing that with my 9XXB. I'll go ahead and do that. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to put in those details. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to erase these extra lines that I have in my picture and in the drawing, that straight line that we started with. I'm going to erase the left side and right side of it so I don't see it anymore. Okay. Now I'm going to draw the eyelids. So I'm going to go back to one of my lighter pencils to draw it. If you look at the corner of the eye compared to where this crease starts over here, it is a little space, but they are not connected, so do not connect them. A lot of times people will connect it and just do something like this. Don't do that. It's not connected here. So it should be over a little space. That's where it should start. It should not start in that same corner of the eye. And then it pretty much runs parallel with the eye halfway. Then the space gets bigger on this right side. So I'm going to make it run parallel. Halfway. So I left that space the same, going halfway. And then for this other part, it gets bigger, a bigger space. And then I don't know if anybody has ever noticed this before. I'm going to pull this up closer to the camera. But there's like this little bit of eyelid before there's any eyelashes, this little tiny ledge. We're going to be drawing that ledge next. So that ledge, it would start pretty much in that corner of the eye. And then it's a little skinny space. It gets a little bit bigger at this, where it's on top of your iris and pupil. That space gets a little bigger. And then it stays big until about that spot right there. So, keeping it big and then smaller. So there's that ledge that people a lot of time will forget. It's before the eyelashes come into play, that part of the eyelid. So go ahead and draw those two parts. When you're done with that, you'll see on this eye that there's another one of those ledges. It starts out thicker and then it just gets smaller when it gets underneath the bottom part of the iris. It gets smaller and then kind of completely vanishes by the time it gets to this point. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that. It starts just a little bit off to the left from the corner of the eye. That's where that ledge starts. And then it will continue being spaced about that same until it gets to over here. And then it gets skinnier. I'm going to walk around and see how people are doing. We're going to be shading very soon. And then we'll do the eyelashes and eyebrows. Very good. Very good. Very good. So now you can see like where this has like more of a greenish tint to it. You could add yellow on top of it and that'll automatically turn it into a green. So now for the shading. Remember, shading isn't making it all the same shade of gray. There's going to be darker spots and lighter spots. So a lot of times what I like to do is completely shade it the lightest gray I see and then go and darken up areas. So the eyelid, this eyelid, the skin around the eye, all becomes a really light gray for the lightest part, and then there's these darker areas that we'll get into. So I'm just going to lightly shade basically everything that is around the white part of the eye, the iris and pupil, everything that's outside of that. So the eyelids and on. It's going to be a light gray. This is something with texture. It should look like skin. So we're going to need to blend it if you have really scratchy lines. So after you shaded a light gray, then you will use your blending stump to blend those areas where you shaded to make it look nice and smooth. Don't blend away the lines that you made for your eyelids and stuff. Remember, when blending, don't use the tip of the stump, just use that flat edge. When you're done shading that skin, then you need to look and see what spots are a little bit darker and make them a little bit darker, and then just keep making them darker until you get those areas that are an actual black, and then you'll switch over to your 9XXB to get those black tones. So like right here on this top lid, I can see that it's a dark gray. And I can still see some creases, some lines. So I'm not going to be blending that all the way. But I'm going to make sure that my pencil lines are going in the correct direction. Over here I can see it's slightly darker side, and it's slightly darker going this other direction. Looks like this side is a little darker, so I'll make it darker. Up here is really light, so I keep all that really light. This is probably a tad darker. And down here it looks like it should get darker. And I'll blend it. And then I'm going to use my 9XXB for these creases that are extremely dark. I'm going to come around and see how people are doing with the shading. And then we'll be shading the white part of the eye a little bit and the tear duct. Okay, now for the white part of the eye, if you look at it up close, there are some shadows from the eyelashes that we have not drawn yet. There's those little tiny gray spikes there. They're supposed to be a reflection of the eyelashes. We will be making those. And over here, there is a tear duct. It's very light in color, so we'll be making ours very light in color too. There's also like a light gray streak right here on the eyeball that I'm assuming is a reflection of something, but those are what we're about to make. So a lot of times there is leftover pencil lead on the blending stump, and I will use the tip of the blending stump to just use kind of what's left over on there to make light gray, essentially smudges. So I'm going to do that for these areas where I see the reflection of eyelashes on the left side. I'm just going to make these little spikes. And then there's a little bit of gray on the left side, so I'll make a little bit of gray there. And then on this side, I'm looking for those gray areas too. There's that streak of gray. And then the tear duct has these lines in it too. And then it gets dark. There's a little more gray in there. There's a little bit of gray down here too. And if you've made anything too dark, you can always take your kneaded eraser and just kind of blot out the area that you made too dark. Also, if there's like some highlighted areas in the skin that you accidentally made too dark, you can push your eraser on there to make it lighter too. Alright, I stopped my video. Only had a few seconds left on it. I don't know how it videotaped that long. Okay. I'm still videotaping on the document camera though. So, for eyelashes, the wrong way to make eyelashes is to have straight lines coming up. We do not view them as straight lines. Eyelashes are usually curved, at least a little bit. So when you look at this, they start out being slight curves going to the left side. Then they start kind of standing straight up. That's like the only one that's like standing straight up. And then it starts to curve to the right side. And that's because of the curvature of the eyeball. Same thing with down here. Make the top eyelashes a little bit thicker and longer than the bottom eyelashes. The bottom eyelashes are usually thinner and shorter. Do not go crazy with them. if there are gaps, there should be gaps. Do not make it like one solid chunk of eyelashes. I'm going to show you how to make these. It's pretty much like a Nike swoosh. Just paying attention to the different directions of it. I'm going to use my HB and see how it goes pushing hard with it, because my 9XXB doesn't have a nice point. But remember, there's that little ledge of no eyelash, so don't put eyelash in that ledge. And some of the eyelashes cross over each other. You do not have to draw them exactly, but they should be similar. Yeah, that's not on. If you accidentally get into that ledge, you can take your kneaded eraser and erase the parts that got in the ledge. That was funny. I don't know if anybody saw that, but I tried to brush away the eyelash on my paper, and it was the one I drew earlier.
It actually
doesn't it? It looks like an eyelash. I know the eyelashes can take some time, so I'm going to go ahead and show you an eyebrow. The eyebrow, there's obviously not enough space in this box, so I'm just going to make it like right above it, like way too high. But an eyebrow usually starts out like at the edge of the eye pretty thick, and then by the other side of the eye, it'll end in like a point, usually. Eyebrows are all different. I'm sure you've seen all different kinds of eyebrows. It looks like someone barely has an eyebrow, or it looks like somebody, instead of having two eyebrows, has like one eyebrow. Eyebrows can be completely different. I'm going to show you one shape of an eyebrow. This one arches up in the center. It's thicker on the part that would have a nose. It was thicker there. After I would outline an eyebrow, I'd put in the eyebrow hairs. And they start out slanted, like toward where an ear would be. Slanted kind of in that direction. Then eventually they go horizontal and then downward a little bit. So I'm going to keep drawing these, and now they're going to start turning until they're like pointing down and they're shorter strokes. And I'm going to go up the other direction. And I'm going to erase. And normally, just that outline. Normally, you would be shading the skin underneath it before doing this. But that's basic on how to make an eyebrow. An eyebrow is not zigzags. Believe it or not, I get that a lot.